I'm just going to talk about this slide because I think Jim's going to really talk about the specifics of what's going to happen. But up in front of you here, and I wrote an opinion piece a few months ago that was ran in the local papers here about sort of this vision for a regional express lane network in Hampton Roads. Based on our history, our restrictions, based on the financial considerations, the ability to work within our current right-of-way, and the fact that we have additional resources down there in Hampton Roads because of the regional transportation monies that came into effect. None of this, and I want to make this very clear, none of these projects would be out there today without those monies. Now, I guess you could say maybe one, Charlie, would have risen to the point. We've gotten one through Smart Scale, maybe one should have attracted some money, but no doubt today we would not be talking about this without HR TAC and those regional monies. Just, you know, because most of the funding has come from the Hampton Roads area for their additional taxes. It's the states, they've attracted money, but the majority of it's from there. And as we stand today, no monies from a federal grant, although part of this presentation today, I think we need to make sure that whatever we do going forward, that we give us the best chance to attract those federal grants, because that's what it looks like it's going to be, at least for the next 4 years. No additional money, but there's going to be grants that are for transformative projects that will be out there, and Virginia needs to make sure it's designing and considering that to attract those monies. And I know Nick's been spending a lot of time in working with the new administration on understanding those new grants, because right now there's no more tire grants the way we used to think of them. They're called infra. Got that right, Nick? Fast lane is now infra, I guess short for infrastructure, but a different focus. In other words, they want to leverage federal dollars to transform a region. So that's key to understanding how we attract them. It's sort of like what we did on our Atlantic Gateway project, where we included rail, vehicular traffic, and multimodal solutions. That's what, if you're going to get federal dollars outside of the allocations that we normally get, which, by the way, last week or last month, y'all voted all those are taken. If we're going to get additional monies, that's how we're going to have to do it. So all those things, our limited resources, policies about the political environment, and choice to our consumers went into how this implementation of where we see things going in Hampton Roads. So the first thing you should understand about this, it's all about choice. None of this up here, if you are a single driver in your car, you will always be able to traverse this network today as a free alternative, with the first exception being just the reversible lanes during certain times, which we'll come back to in that. But you can't use them today, so now you'll have the ability to pay in those lanes if you want to use them. But that, I want to make sure this is key. Anything you see up here going forward, there will be a free alternative. You can stay in the general purpose lanes, or you can put one more person in your car. And then you can use any of the lanes free anytime. So this is all about choice and all about the fact of having to do policy with limited resources and the political, I don't mean the Republican Democrat, but the political parochial environments we live in. Because at the end of the day, that's what we're talking about, is making travel better for our citizens. That's really what it is. So if you look at this, the first section up there, segment 1, which is the reversible lanes that already exist, the HOV lanes, will be coming online this fall, actually in December. The construction's already started down there, and what are we changing there? These lanes have been in existence for many years, and instead of increasing the amount of throughput through there, the occupants per car has actually gone down. So totally underutilized. This is an option for now, You can use the road legally as a single driver during the rush hours. Now you just have to pay a toll. But if you want to use it during those rush hours and you don't want to pay a toll, just put another person in your car. So it's choice. Or you can stay in the lanes that are totally free, the way you're traveling all today. And by the way, every time somebody chooses to use this lane, it frees up the other lane that you were going to be in. So that's going to come online this December. Right now, VDOT, I believe, is in the construction slash the testing phase. And I want to make something very clear, because there's a couple reports on this and here in Northern Virginia, because inside the Beltway is going to be coming on inside tolling in Northern Virginia. And yes, we directed additional testing to be done on these roads. They're going to open at the same time, sometime in December. It's the first time VDOT has done variable pricing. And particularly in Hampton roads, and a little bit in Northern Virginia, but particularly, there was such a bad implementation of tolling that we got to make sure we get this right. So that's why I ordered 2 to 3 more months of additional testing. And it's going to cost a little bit of money. And so you know what? That's the best money we'll ever spend. We're getting that open so the public understands that they're going to be charged correctly for the use of these roads. So that's the first session that's coming on. Now, as I said, HR TAC monies have been putting a lot of these projects going forward. And the next one, which we're going to vote on tomorrow, that's Section 2, and that's the high-rise bridge. That's a $600 million project, I think, Charlie, in that range?
Approximately, yes, sir.
Yeah, in that range. And it's going to have a hot lane component, which you'll be voting on tomorrow. Yeah.
Correct. We'll vote in September.
I'm sorry, September, excuse me, which you'll vote on in September. That's right, because we, in September. That will always be free for those who use it today as a free alternative. But there will be a hot lanes component that will be able to coordinate with Section 1. And this, Section 1 comes on this year. Section 2, 2021, is when we expect to be finished completion of that. Now, by the way, it's HOV to HO2 hot. And the local area down there has had this in all their plans. In other words, tolling in this on all their plans down there. Again, this project is mainly funded with HR TAC monies and the state of Virginia's contribution. Let me make a point in part here. We're not doing the tolling for money. I know that's what you're going to hear. You're going to say, oh, gosh, you're doing it because you just to help pay for the project. Obviously, that's true. But we're doing it, just as important is the managing of the road network and giving choices. We have got to get more throughput. We couldn't build extra lanes on these interstates because of the circumstances I just talked to you about, getting out of the right-of-way, and the money needed to build them. So yes, the revenues are useful to help pay for some of the facilities, but they don't pay for them by a long shot. The main thing is we're using this to manage traffic in there. So that's Section 2 that comes on. Now, because of the good work of VDOT and HR TAC, we also have the ability for Section 3, which is the HRBT, the Hampton Roads Bridge Tunnel. And that's going to be coming online in 2024 in that. Now, many of these projects were just thought about a few years ago. If you just said these were going to be out there, people would have laughed at you. But this is going to become a reality. Now, it made no sense not planning those additional extensions without considering the network and how they're going to coordinate. So these will all go on 2017, now the reversible lanes, 2021, the high-rise bridge around the Bowers Hill, and then 2024 connecting into the Hampton Roads Bridge Tunnel. It'll all be HOV to HOT hot to 2, but I gotta, what will determine if it goes to HOT3 will be the utilization of the road. And this board will have to look at that and determine what makes sense to manage the traffic in those areas. Now, there's one other section up there, that's Section 4, and that's the lanes on the peninsula. There are currently not plans for those to be hot lanes, but we would be less than honest to say there's a potential for it to be. And if we truly want to have a transformative project and attract federal dollars, that may be something this board may need to consider as we go through here. Because it's all about getting people through and around Hampton roads. So what I wanted to impress upon you today is that these decisions weren't just not thought through and not considering what our charge is and also the resources and the environment that we work in and the ability to track federal dollars for these monies. Because I think that is going to be a key part of this board as to how there's going to be more calls on the limited resources we have. Because I didn't even talk about what's going to happen with WMATA. I haven't even talked about what's going to happen with transit in general across the Commonwealth. This board, without legislative action, is going to have to deal with that. Or not deal with it, but by not dealing with it, you deal with it. So you're either going to have, without additional resources or attracting grants, you're either going to have to deal with cutting back transit services or taking money from other surface transportation to do that. So that's the environment we're working in, and I wanted just to take a few minutes. I know it's been close to a half an hour because I got on my soapbox, Mr. Williams, and I apologize. But I also thought it was important for the public to understand. Yeah, these are not taken in a vacuum. Our charge is to move transportation forward. But I think we've done that in this environment with the most choice we can, because those revenues for managing that traffic will be used to support the facility and offer multimodal alternatives, which are going to be the way. If you're going to have a growth area, you got to expect people are going more people are going to move into that area, just like we've seen in Northern Virginia. Now let me finish on one last point. We also have to deal with the existing contracts we have. And that one of those contracts is the alternative facilities charge that potentially hangs against us out there at the downtown Midtown tunnel. I don't know if this is going to mitigate, help, whatever. I know it's the right thing for Hampton roads based on the environments. But it will be this board's responsibility. If there is a claim, it'll be our responsibility to deal with it. And so that's another factor to consider. Not HR TAC, it isn't the region's problem. That's a state problem. So I think that needs to be considered in making sure that we are doing everything as effectively and wisely as we can, considering the restrictions on our resources and the environment we live in. So, guys, I'm going a little bit longer, but I really thought that was important for you to understand. I mean, any comments or questions where I call Jim up here? Okay. Well, thanks. And I'll probably try to do this on a few more topics as we go forward. But Jim, why don't you come up? Jim Utterback's the district administrator down in Hampton Roads. He and with Charlie's team and him have been the ones that have been putting all this together, and I'll say getting projects done on time, on budget. So, Jim, come on up, sir.
Okay, Mr. Secretary, members of the CTB, good morning. And I'm going to follow the Secretary, which is good and bad in some ways. So, great presentation by him, and I'll try not to be too redundant. I did want to just talk about the top slide just for a minute to help your perspective, because I know myself, the Secretary, Mr. Malbin, and Mr. Williams are quite familiar with the Hampton Roads Network. So, what is in front of you is 5 interstates. So, but really what we're talking about is a regional express lane network that starts on 64 and stays on 64 for about 45, 46 miles. So we start at Jefferson Avenue. That's in the upper left-hand corner of the map on 6. That's at really just east, or actually just west of the exit 255. So, and it comes all the way around. That's all 64, and 64 ends at the bottom center of your map at mile marker 300. So right around 45, 46 miles, and that's affectionately known as Bowers Hill Interchange on the south side. And the again, there's 4 other interstates that we're going to interact. And as I try to walk you through the interstate alphabet soup, I'll try to help you with that. And generally, other than starting with segment 1, when we go to 2, 3, and 4, as I'm going to go through all 5 pieces, we'll go kind of east to west around the network from that standpoint. So the first slide, and this is actually very similar to a presentation slide that I made to the CTB just over a year ago, and it really goes into the history of the CTB and some of the decisions that were made in the past related to the HOV network in Hampton Roads. So in 1992, you can see the resolution that designated HOV lanes. That was in August. In September, the reversible HOV lanes that the Secretary talked about were opened. As you can see, in 1998, the CTB came back and restricted trucks from operating in the HOV lanes network. In 99, we changed the hours, or the CTB changed the hours. So again, there was some outcry on the utilization at that time and the restricted hours. So they were at where they are currently in the network. So the next slide, and that's actually a picture at morning rush hour. I can tell by the sun and direction. A heavy flow to the base, a flow away from the base as well, and not much congestion in the reversible lanes. That's really fairly typical of the count. These lanes are woefully underutilized or underused. In June of 2008, the U.S. Secretary of Transportation actually responded to a request from a Virginia congresswoman to return the HOV lanes to general purpose lanes based on the type of funding could not do that, but they did encourage us at that time to look at converting these to hot lanes.
Comment there. I wouldn't have done it if they'd allowed us, because it's not the right way to use the infrastructure. And I would have made my recommendation to the board. But we did get a ruling saying that they could not be done. But quite frankly, all we would do is induce having congestion in those areas without inducing people to use more throughput of people. So I'll go out and basically say I would not have recommended to this board that we would have just opened them up for general use.
So October 2016, this board took an action to authorize dynamic tolling on the segment 1, the HOV reversible lanes, and we set the hours at 5 to 9. So that was last fall. We made those presentations, and this board took action on segment 1, as we call it. And just as a top level kind of benefits of an express lane network, Secretary touched on this. Probably the most important point is that it is a choice for travelers. So there is a free alternative that exists at all times in the general purpose lanes, and this is an incentive for carpooling, use of transit, and a single occupancy person can pay a toll to have a faster or reliable trip through the network. So it reduces congestion on the general purpose lanes. I did not, this presentation doesn't go into the details on the feasibility, but we followed the same general approach and analysis of all of these segments for feasibility, and with the key criteria being obviously that the hot lanes would not be a negative revenue generator, so they would essentially pay for themselves, and the criteria that it would help reduce congestion in the general purpose lanes. The other criteria obviously is that we could construct it from that standpoint and have ingress and egress, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. So again, moving people and maximizing efficiency of the existing road network. The Secretary talked about that as well, and the incentives for carpooling and transit that are inherent in the system. So segment one, again, just as you know, this is the piece that goes from 264 interchange on 64 up to 564, and that's where 564 goes to the naval base. This is a heavily traveled artery for Chesapeake, Virginia Beach, and other areas to get to the base in the morning, and obviously to get to the HRBT. So the typical section that's in there, we didn't change anything. It's the 3 general purpose lanes in each direction and the 2 reversible lanes. This is a little bit of a busy chart, but again, the same kind of, if you take the previous chart, the upper left-hand corner is the 564-64 interchange, and then basically coming east to the bottom right where the 64-264 interchange is. Basically shows the ingress, egress at each end of this thing. So you get in and at one end and basically travel to the other. There's some a little bit of it looks like multiple egress, ingress at the 264, but that's all about giving people the ability to get out, to get to Norfolk, or to travel to Virginia Beach or Chesapeake. So, but essentially you're in and out in one location. Just a little bit of the timeline. We touched on this. I won't spend a lot of time. We completed the feasibility study in July 16. Again, came to this board in October. We are currently, the toll gantries have been installed, so they are out there. The toll system integration is underway, and we plan to have the system start testing in September and going operational in December, as the Secretary again mentioned that as well. Public outreach, and we've just started there's a couple of different efforts going in Hampton roads. One is trying to increase the penetration of Easy Pass. So that is going on, and we are following that as well with specific to segment 1 and Flex Pass. So we'll start a heavier, more detailed outreach program, but you can see we've already started launching website, Twitter messages. The Deputy Secretary, we launched a video yesterday. She is the consumer advocate for the express lanes, so we've got a good video of her, several of those that we're releasing, and then we've got some flyers or distribution of more travel choices ahead. So just getting going on that with a focus on Easy Pass awareness and utilization.
Comment on that too. That's another reason for not only the testing, but making sure we have ample opportunity and resources to public outreach so that everybody knows how to use the roads, the times, and the difference between a flex pass and another pass, because with the ability to use it when you have other people in the car, you don't get paid the toll. And this will help our other toll users in Hampton roads, other facilities, as we get more penetration. And that is the least expensive way to use these roads is through an Easy Pass. So one of my facilities. So we want to make sure we didn't do such a great job several years ago when we did the Midtown, Downtown. We definitely want to make sure that we give a robust effort here and the outreach so people understand what's going on.
Segment 2, and again, it's part of the alphabet soup and the segments, and what I want to do, clarify, when we first did the analysis, we looked at the reversible lanes, and there's diamond lanes about 6 miles in Chesapeake. Those were not feasible, so at that time. So we went back and did another feasibility analysis that looked at the high-rise P section and also the Chesapeake existing diamond lanes, and looked at those two sections together. And what we found is, and again, it's one reason the Secretary, we're looking at a network, these segments of interstate perform better when you kind of work them or hook them together and create a network. So that's what we found on what we're calling segment 2, which is really the combination of the Chesapeake diamond lanes existing and the new high-rise bridge project. So this essentially goes from the beginning or end of I-64 at Bowers Hill at the 464, or actually it's the 264 and 664 interchange with 64. So in the bottom center, as I said, and it comes around and crosses over the high-rise bridge at 564. That's the termination of the capacity expansion, the high-rise bridge project that we've talked about. From there, it picks up and with the existing diamond lanes and goes to 64. Again, traveling west on 64 in the eastward direction. So it's one thing about 64, it goes actually direction-wise north-south, and except for when it goes east-west, and it's kind of marked in a different manner. But anyway, not to confuse you, the two typical sections that we show are the new lanes, the high-rise bridge, which is 2 general-purpose lanes and 1 hot lane in each direction. So that's the top typical section that we're proposing. And then the bottom is the existing diamond lanes in Chesapeake, which is 3 general purpose in each direction with a hot lane or an HOV currently in each direction. So that's the existing HOV configuration that we would convert those hot lanes. And just to, not to try to confuse you anymore, but this is the satellite image, and it's the same thing you just looked at with the Bowers Hill interchange on the left part of the screen. The idea is the travelers would get in the hot lanes just east of Bowers Hill and travel west or east in the direction. Basically go over the high-rise bridge. There's only one entry point on the beginning or east or west side, and then you can get egress, ingress once you cross over the high-rise bridge prior to the 464 interchange. So that's really in the bottom center of your screen. And then as you essentially go into the existing diamond lanes, and there is a midway point at Greenbrier. They're looking at an ingress, egress at Greenbrier interchange there. And then the final ingress egress from this segment is right before the 264 interchange is where you would get back into segment 1, or you could stay in the diamond lanes and would transition into the reversible lanes. Okay, so just a real quick summary on there was an environmental assessment approved by Federal Highway in 2014. This CTB took action, and this is on the high-rise bridge project. So this CTB took action to adopt the location for that, which included basically a caveat that the CTB would be briefed on future management options once we had done the studies and financial analysis for that. So that's what we're doing today. And then September of 2016, the commissioner authorized VDOT to enter into an agreement with HR TAC to start moving the project forward, and allowed us to do some of the early engineering analysis to conduct a feasibility and make sure geometrically we could make this work. And just this past June, we finalized the HOV-HOT conversion feasibility study, as I mentioned. So segment 3 is the basically from 564 to 664, including the HRBT. So this goes from the south side to the north side if we're going east to west. And so you can see that segment. I think everybody's familiar with that. That's about 12 miles of interstate. And the land on the peninsula and south side, we would carry 2 general purpose lanes existing plus 1 express lane in each direction. At a minimum, the tunnel expansion would have 2 general purpose lanes and 1 express lane. So we will be looking at additional alternatives during the procurement to see if there's any way to get more capacity through this particular artery. As you know, this is one of the key, this is the backbone of the network in Hampton roads.
Right there, I have, and I know Jim has too, we've talked with the Transportation Planning Organization in Hampton Roads, and obviously they're up with this agreement with these provisions. But this is what I was talking about. If we want to attract federal dollars, we're going to be working with the TPO. They've offered to provide resources, and Nick and my deputy secretary and putting together this grant together in VDOT. as we look at options, and that's why you see VDOT. We know what's going to be the end result, but the actual configuration. A lot goes into that in determining not only traffic flow, but working with attracting dollars and different things. And so I will point out we have made the commitment. There will be no construction outside of the right-of-way on the north end, well, I guess the west end, where Hampton University is in that. So we are working with them that that there could be some temporary, and they allow us to use the land to get there, but there will be no permanent taking of land at Hampton University in that. Our intent will be in the right-of-way everywhere, but we can't make that final until, particularly on the south side, until we get through the design, build, and working with the federal authorities and outreach with the public and all that. Yeah, yes, Mr. Whitworth.
I assume when we made the decision there to utilize the HOV lanes to allow hot lanes go in there, that we found that there was excess capacity in the HOV. Is that correct?
Yes, yes, they were underused. There was excess capacity in HOV.
And was that the case in all three segments?
Yes, yes, sir.
Was it substantial?
Yes, sir. Yeah, but it's very, very low. And now the reversible has the 2 lanes, which carries roughly 1,600 vehicles an hour, and we were at a fraction of capacity. The single HOV lanes, again, were a fraction as well. So a little bit higher use, but certainly can absorb what we're talking about from or projecting for hot use.
I can validate that since traveling this morning that the general purpose lanes were completely congested and virtually no one in the reversible lane. So.
One other comment I'll make to that too, though, in every pro forma that we've worked with HR TAC and the TPO on their funding, they have included to be able to put in their long-range plan tolls at all these facilities. So I want to make that clear too. It's the right thing, Mr. Whitworth, also in terms of the studies show that the utilization and the excess capacity that we can use, but also in their funding plan they've assumed that in terms of being able to move these projects forward in funding. It doesn't support a great percentage of it, but it does support some of the funding of HR TAC, because all the tolling that would be done, just like in Northern Virginia, has to remain on the corridor in which the toll payers pay it. So all those monies go back in to helping reduce the cost of the facility, the maintenance of the facility in Hampton Roads.
I want to make a couple points, and I might have glazed over one, but want to make sure we understand it. These last 2 bullets really show what we're projecting based on working with the region, and the availability of funding would be to award the construction contract in 19 with a 5-year construction period, and 2024 the facility be complete, the express lanes would be open. So that's kind of key, and it'll feed into segment 4. I may not have mentioned on segment 2 that the high-rise bridge is projected to be complete in 2021, and that's when the HOT would go into effect on the new lanes at the completion of construction in 2021 and the conversion of the existing diamond lanes in Chesapeake. So right now we're moving forward with December on the reversible lanes. The next segment, segment 2 in Chesapeake, basically would be 2021 when the high-res bridge is completed. This would be segment 3, the HRBT would be 2024. And we'll transition into segment 4, which picks up at the 664 interchange on the peninsula and goes west to Jefferson Avenue. So that we've just started looking at. There's been some earlier studies, but we're really going to start evaluating that for an HOV-HOT conversion for the full length of that segment, and that would tie to HRBT. If it's feasible, this conversion would happen at the same time the HRBT construction is completed in 2024. So again, the network Essentially, it would be over the next 7 years as we go through this, and the entire, if, you know, obviously analysis work and everything goes as planned, the entire 45 miles would have a hot network in about 2024.
Section 4, where's it go to? Fort East Boulevard?
Goes to Jefferson Avenue. Jefferson Avenue.
The Diamond Lanes end
Right.
today.
Right now, where it ends today. Yeah, that's right.
Until the end of this year, and then that segment 1 project will be complete.
Look, that's
So let me point out, I want to make sure this is a potential. There has been no decision made on this. No vote will be taken on that this year. VDOT's just looking at it. But in us talking to the federal authorities in terms of potential for funding, that may be an important part. And so that's something we needed to research, and so that will be something the board would take and work with the region based on that opportunity. So I want to make it clear there's been no decision, but we would not be doing our job if we weren't looking at how this is all going to tie in, potentially, both from a traffic management and a potential attracting of federal dollars. And that, so that's the only vote we're taking in September, and thank you for correcting me, Charlie, is on segment, the high-rise bridge, at that particular section.
Oh, sorry.
Assuming 1, 2, 3, and 4 is accomplished, how does that impact the underlying issue that we all know of the evacuation of that area?
So let me answer that, Mr. Whitworth. First of all, I don't know if you saw, we've changed significantly the evacuation plans of Hampton roads. It is no longer reversible lanes. It is now evacuation in place based on storm surge. That was from the very beginning, it was pretty clear that that was an unworkable situation, thinking we could in 72 hours evacuate 1.5 million people. And then where would they go? So the answer is that from the overall standpoint, it's a much different evacuation plan in terms of how we would deal with a storm surge in Hampton roads. Now, I'll let Jim talk about if there's any specifics, but the reversible lanes is no longer the stated policy of the Commonwealth.
Just
those arms.
I don't know. I mean, we'll see. But we went through that, and Charlie, it's never been done before, and it takes 800 people, state police and all to man it. There's just would not work, and that was the decision. So certainly there's a whole coordination with safety and police, but as a policy, we no longer have reversible lanes as the primary policy. I don't know if we're going to come down or any of that, but that is not the policy and that was just made a couple months ago. The governor went down with that announcement at Hampton Roads, which was coordinated with the area and obviously makes a lot more sense. Most people are killed by storm surge. That's where most in that wind. And what we found is, quite frankly, even if we evacuated many of them west, the backside of the storm was flooded, or 60 others were flooded. They were, just as significant. So, Mr. Whitworth, it is a consideration, but not like it was before.
Well, my question is, how do we measure it, and how much have we improved that measurement?
Are you, in terms of the capacity of the network?
Yeah, well, evidently we could only evacuate so many in so many hours. Now, with this, how much of an improvement would that be?
I don't think we've looked.
we haven't done that analysis. I was just I guess as a point of clarification, if the governor declares a state of emergency, and whether it's not a formal evacuation, but we have through the commissioner, have the ability to lift the tolls. we can change reversible lanes based on traffic patterns. So there's a lot of, we've got a plan, a hurricane plan we work through that works with localities, works with the Coast Guard, with all the movable bridges. So there's a number of things we can do to help people leave if they're going to leave, and help traffic that way. But not a, the last resort is the formal lane reversal, and Secretary covered that in policy-wise. We could do another presentation on hurricane stuff.
Probably not a bad idea, as well, this comes online, like see
I'd like to see it.
I think that's a good point.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's incumbent upon us to at least have some comfort level that we have made progress there.
Well, I can tell you, I think there's been progress, if there's a comfort level, and I think that was one of the problems that we had before, that one of the governor to change the policy. There was this comfort level that we just reverse the lanes and everything would be okay. That's not. I don't mean that to be flippant. And so, evacuate, when I say in place, is getting to high ground and getting out of the way. And I know VDOT worked closely with emergency management and others in that new thing. But I think that's probably a good idea, because we probably haven't looked in general for a long time exactly what type of volume. Yeah, so we'll I think that's something that take a look at. So Charlie will, Jim?
I think all that there was a conversation of maybe evacuating by zones. How you would manage that, I'm really not sure. There's really no more lane capacity, so it's more of a process of an organized evacuation, and how that would be administered by zones, I have no idea.
There's the whole question on sea level rise and how it's impacting a whole network down there, which I know several of the localities have programs and stuff working with their citizens. But what we found is, and not getting too far off on a tangent here, is that the evacuation wasn't so much once they got to the interstate. It was getting to the interstate. In other words, like even with 460, getting to 460 was going to be a problem, even if that road were built in that. So that's what led a lot of Mr. Whitworth for the governor's task force in redesigning those plans.
Okay, the last slide I had, and the Secretary alluded to this, and again is with the timeline. Basically, as you think of 2017, 2021, and 2024 for implementations, and the fact that the high-rise bridge, we would need to, we would come to the CTB in September and ask for the following actions. One is designate the new lanes associated with the high-rise bridge project as HOV, and authorizing the use of dynamic tolling for that facility. We also would ask to go ahead and have the action to convert the existing Chesapeake, the diamond lanes in Chesapeake, that's from 164, from 464 to 264 to a hot two, and use dynamic tolling on that as well. The other thing that's a little bit different from what we're doing on segment 1 initially is we would want to designate these operational hours on the 64 hot lanes in Chesapeake as 24/7. So 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, it would be tolled. And the last bullet was we would ask for authorization to use a toll facility revolving account funds for the initial startup on 264. This board this past spring did authorize, or actually award the contract to TransCore to do the system integration, the tolling components. We did negotiate options in that contract that would include the high-rise bridge and the Chesapeake lane. So we have the contract vehicle in place as try to use the synergy with one tolling provider to move that forward. So we would need, and that's estimated around $12 million for both of those segments. So that would be the 4 bullets. Yes.
Just one comment about the facility. Of course, Jim mentioned this would not be until 2021 when it's done. but it made no sense to have restricted hours and then turn around a couple years later and have the HRBT open up. And by the way dynamic pricing works is if there's no congestion, it's going to be very little toll in the lanes. So it made no sense designating hours. Unlike the reversible, we have to because they only go one direction. We don't have bi-directional traffic in there, so in that regard. So that's why the decision and looking at the future, everything being 24/7 from the Chesapeake section on in terms of this potential network.
Sir, and part of that is to follow on to the Secretary, these, the high-rise and Chesapeake lanes would be separated. There would be a barrier on the bridge that would separate the general purpose from the hot lanes, and then you would have essentially what you see in Northern Virginia on the 495 express lanes where you have the white plastic pipes that would be separated. So again, that didn't, from a traffic standpoint, once you get in, you're going to stay in, so it does make sense to have those 24/7.
Ms. Valentine.
I really appreciate the maps as we're going through this and seeing the segments, so just really well done. I'm curious to know, to go back to your opening remarks, you know, is there a transit plan that is kind of overlaid with this, you know, as creating these choices?
So not like you would see in Northern Virginia. And the reason
That's
why,
really what made me think
the
of the
reason why,
question.
Ms. Valentine, is the legislation in Hampton Roads for HR TAC specifically designates their monies have to, unlike Northern Virginia, they don't have the ability to do it on transit. So there is a plan, but it's working directly with the transit agency, DRPT, and finding other sources, grants and what have you, to supplement this. The tolling do not generate enough to support that. So it would be it would be simply working like we do normally, which we have with the ERC, River Crossings, looking at the abilities to move. Quite frankly, whether that's extended bus service or what have, which makes the most logical, and that's what that would be a fundament upon DRPT, but not as part of the formal program because of legislation and simply there's just not enough tolling that would support it.
Recommendations of our transit funding group is to put the floor on the tax there, which didn't get on the regions, and to allow them to use that money for transit. Now that's going to be up to the legislature, not up to us.
That is not an option as currently the law.
That's one of our
Which I think
strong
would be a
suggestions.
valuable decision personally, but the coordination piece is really what I was, you know, the funding piece is separate, but the coordination of building that into the solutions.
And we are working with HRT to see if there are ways that they can utilize the hot lanes for some of their transit services that provide service in that same corridor.
Makes so much sense. Yeah.
So we couldn't make it project specific like we did in '66 because it just wasn't the opportunity to do that. But we'll accomplish it through what Ms. Mitchell said. Let me point out again, because there's been a couple of articles that just have been inaccurate. Every nickel of any toll paid in Hampton Roads stays in Hampton Roads. I mean, that's law. You know, you know, a lot of people have made the comment, several, that, oh, they're going to take the monies. That's an inaccurate, untrue statement. They must, and that is all the plans. It's always ever been that way. Yes, Mr. Connors.
Thank you, and thank you, Jim, for the presentation. I think I know the answer to this question, but given your earlier remarks about transparency and lessons learned about the continuous community outreach that's necessary in a lot of these things, what does that look like? Can you give us a little bit of explanation on?
I can give you a little bit of what it looks like. In addition to the specifics, Ms. Johnson's not here. She's and she's been working with VDOT, and Shannon's here, I know, in that. It's going to look a lot like we started on 29 with you know, consumer groups reaching out and working with them as they go through construction. It's going to look a lot like the social media that we've done and on 66 and we continue to do up there. So it's, the program Ms. Johnson will come back at another time working with VDOT and come up and give the board this. But it's multi-pronged, and I think the best thing you could look at is what has happened on 29 and 66. But it's a lot of input, and I mean, I can tell you, you can go look at hundreds of public meetings and 66, not counting the specific contacts of responding to emails and all that. So that's why Jim's slide was today simply about it's going to come, what the intent is, but we will be happy to brief the board on that program as they develop it over the next month or so.
Thank you.
Ms.
Can I follow up on that? You may recall when we had our public hearing up in Northern Virginia that we heard a number of comments from people about community process and suggestions for improving it. And I believe the climate has changed so dramatically in the last 3.5 years about how VDOT conducts outreach, I think, in all pretty much to the good. So here's my question. Does the CTB have a set of expectations, a policy, if you will, a resolution that says what we believe are sort of the bare bones outline of what good civic engagement around this looks like? And if we don't, ought we to think about asking you to bring us something that we could adopt that would at least give the public a sense of what the process is and what the steps are?
We don't currently have a resolution. Do you want to say something, Mr. Kilpatrick?
I think to your point, we are continuing to work on find better ways of connecting with the citizens. We've in the past sometimes relied on what's more of a mechanical process that is prescribed by code, by federal code and by regulations, where certain public hearings must occur at certain times during the process. And it does frankly become mechanical. I can tell you personally that the standard public hearing process to me is largely, I believe, ineffective. It is sometimes an opportunity for people to speak their position, but the greater community, I think it's not a good venue for that kind of discussion. So the 66 projects in Northern Virginia, the 29 project in Charlottesville, a number of other projects around the state where we're having more, I'll call it grassroots and informal type discussions, I think has really served us well. We've been talking internally about our public involvement process, both I'll call it the legal requirements, but more so how we go about involvement and get involvement earlier in the process. So I think we'd be glad to come back to you with some thoughts and some recommendations. Again, from our communication side, from Garrett and his team, we all recognize the importance of that involvement, and it's important early on, and then to be able to circle back as we get into detailed design, make sure that what we thought we heard is what the community meant. So we'll be glad to bring something back.
Yeah, but you make a good point, Ms. Hines, and it leads me into, I'm glad you brought it up. These projects, the success are policy and execution. And I think it would be very appropriate, not the detailed plan, but from a policy perspective of since it is the board's responsibility for that policy. And I think many times in the past, VDOT got blamed for a policy the board or the administration didn't message correctly. And and now maybe from the board not asked to be involved from the administration standpoint because in that, but I think that's very, very important. The policy, VDOT will execute the projects at the policy given to the board and having an expectation of what outreach ought to be, not how many meetings and all that, but what ought to be the accomplishment, I think is very, very much the purview so that the people understand the policies that went behind this decision.
That we can build on.
That we can build
right?
on. That's right. That we can build on, not that say, because I can tell you, I mean, what happens is they tend to get, I can say, I can pick a one-word thing. I don't like tolls. I don't like taxes. I got it. But if you're going, and that's why I took the start of the infrastructure, you know, this board is charged with moving transportation forward in the Commonwealth with the resources and the issues that at its disposal. So I do think that is another factor, the board taking responsibility and making the administration be accountable for the policies it adopts and to the public as to why they've adopted those policies.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary, and I really would hope we get to it before the end of this year because I think this is one of those things that we need to carry over regardless of who's sitting in your seat and who's sitting in the governor's seat. We've learned a lot. The community has come to expect a different ways to engage that allow for alternative views to be put forward and considered thoughtfully, and I think that's really important moving forward.
Well, I think it is because that's another reason why I felt it important that the Secretary's office be at every public hearing, because we make the policies. Not fair to paint BDOT with the policies that the administration or the board's taken. So I think that is right. I hope that we have instilled that in the public going forward.